successful, but if you follow the idea of putting together your high-level technical content well, the chances you succeed are certainly going to be higher. Next is detailed content, and the detailed content includes everything you're going to convey in the presentation. It not only is your words, your expressions, and your visual aids, so my visual aids in this case is my slides, it's all of them put together. And you can see I'm using hand gestures now to make points. I'm trying to make eye contact. I'm trying to speak clearly, and I'm trying to pick my words carefully. We have there's a real tendency to start trying to consider that detailed content is the same as the slides you come up with. That's because of how most of us build our conference presentations or our scientific presentations. We normally think, okay, I have all this work, I put some slides together, and now I'll just throw some words in around that. But the detailed content is not just equivalent to visual aids or slides. Actually, it's very interesting. I've seen Professor Jacobs in front of me because that was an extremely demonstration-oriented talk, which is a little bit unusual. I don't think we see too many of those oftentimes because it's hard to bring samples and bring things to conferences, right? Very hard, right? Yeah, you said don't touch it. I touched it. That's not a nice noise. Building an organized global structure of the presentation is important. And the analogy I make here is it's really, for most of us, it's similar to actually writing a lab report. A lab report has, a set of normal things we talk about: introduction, procedure, examples, discussion, concluding remarks. The key point is, regardless of if you're using this common sort of structure or not, all of your points have to be organized. You have to have some sort of transition between your slides. People can't say, now how did he get, or how did she get from the last slide to this slide? It seems like a completely different idea. Your talk will look very choppy if you do that. So some flow is important. You have to orient people in the presentation. The generic old way of doing it is, of course, to put an outline slide. Outline slides, unfortunately, can really waste about a minute or two. It's easier, or there are other ways to go about doing that. It doesn't hurt you to put an outline slide in as long as you just make the point really quickly and actually orient people with it. But don't spend too much time on that. That's something that I've spent a lot of my career where I would put an outline slide in, and every time you get to that outline slide in the presentation, I ask myself, why did I put this in here? I don't really need it. The key, orient people. And then, of course, the examples. This picture, by the way, I wanted something that looked like an organized structure. This is it's called a hyperbolic tower. And this was built in the early 20th century. Pretty cool. In terms of visual aids, good slide design really ensures that your information is clearly portrayed and supports the points that you're trying to make. This venue is a little bit difficult. There's a little bit of width to it. There's some depth to it. The angles are a little bit different. Some of the other talks I've seen in other venues, the slides will probably be very easy to see. They're a little bit more difficult depending on where you're sitting. I was sitting up here in the morning. Generally, though, using appropriate text, there are some general guidelines. I have a reference that talks about this sort of thing. 18 to 28 point, maybe 14 point for references. Sans serif fonts, you don't want all these extra little, you don't want all these little extra marks and things on your text. Bold is better, and primarily lowercase. If you actually capitalize everything, it takes people longer to read them. And most of all, one major concept per slide. If you try to make 3 or 4 major concepts per slide, you better have a long time to make those points. You'd better have 4 or 5 minutes to make those points.
I may point something out. The number 1 of it, you're using serifs on it. Otherwise, you wouldn't recognize that as being 1.
That's a great point. Did you get that on film?
Yeah.
And actually, I've got I said it's a general rule. Excessive information can really block the point and make slides unreadable. This applies to words. It applies to graphics. It certainly applies to equations. And I have an example that Professor Jacobs has probably seen because he was on my thesis committee. And my thesis advisor, Ryan Stone, and I argued for months about this slide. Because the first presentation I was putting together, and don't tell him I said this, by the way, but we argued for months about this. Pete loved this slide. He thought it was great. I hated it. I said, I think I counted 176 plots here. There is an absolutely unreadable set of numbers. And of course here it's a little bit smaller than what the original slide was. The original slide was actually on the transparency. I'm a little older than I love. You can see here I've got a mistake where I haven't actually marked that axis. That's why I've got that circle in blue. But if you see in general, nobody's going to get anything out of this. So what we actually had in the talk was we had a second slide that only talked about one of these boxes. And that was actually, pretty easy to handle in the presentation. He liked it because it shows it works for a whole variety of cases. I hated it because people are going to get distracted by trying to read the whole thing. So here's an example from my own work that I never liked and I think is really a problem if you do it. You might want to throw something up like this really fast, but try not to get people distracted from your main points. And most importantly, you can use it in your manuscript.
You could use this to show, you could use this and say, don't bother to look at the stuff, but look how much work I've done, something along those lines. No, seriously, you
right,
have to do it in the right tone, right?
Right, I might as well put a picture of my wife and I on vacation. Wait, I got that later in the talk. I think the point's well made that if you use something like this, you need to put it up in a way that's not going to distract people.
Exactly. Right.
And the way that you conveyed it, if you said, look, this type of method works for a variety of cases, and that was your whole point in the slide,
right,
that can work.
And then you hone in maybe on
But the second you start having people eating carrots trying to read this thing, it's a real problem. Of course, the fonts are too small and all kinds of things. A couple comments on equations. We probably have a lot of physicists in here. I've seen over the years that I think people have gotten a little bit better at giving some of these sorts of talks. When I was first in optics, there was a lot of people that would get up there and they would just show slides after slide of mathematics. And yes, there was one or two mathematicians in the room where people were already really familiar with the work. They probably could follow it. Talks aren't meant to prove the work. Talks are meant to inspire people to look at your other documentation and come to talk to you afterwards and to put just enough supporting information in there that people believe it, that people see that there's credibility in the work. You're trying to convey some bigger picture points. No one's going to remember a slide that has a bunch of mathematics on it 5 minutes later, probably. So one example is, let's say I have a long derivation. That's the key portion of the actual paper I've written. And I've had this before. You might want to show a starting point or at least explain what a starting point is. You might want to give a description of how you would go about deriving it. And then you certainly want to show the result. And you can think with something like Schrodinger's equation, which many people are very familiar with. There's many ways to use it. There's many ways. There's kind of a heuristic derivation you can do. If you were giving a talk and you wanted to try to convey what this really means to people, you probably wouldn't want to start off with a 5-slide long derivation of some facet of it. So simple equations are better. Derivations, really only keep those in manuscripts and lectures. These are just my personal things I've seen over the years that I believe make more effective scientific presentations. A little bit on practicing. Practice facilitates a really, really good delivery. Vince Lombardi was a pretty famous American football coach of the Green Bay Packers, and he said, practice does not make perfect, the way perfect practice makes perfect. So in other words, he felt that practicing a lot would actually allow you to improve whatever you were doing. And in this case, of course, he was talking about football. So here you've got some practice. As you practice more, your talk is probably going to become more cohesive. The words will become more familiar. You'll certainly generally start improving. The transitions will get better. You'll make your key points better. I'll get back to language in a minute. Length. You can test to make sure that the length is okay. And then, of course, that leads to success. Your personality actually matters quite a bit. If you've just seen from the speakers we've had today, I've seen 3 before me, we all have different personalities, we all have different presentation styles. Everyone has to try to find a presentation style that works for you. So here is my wife and I last year at Machu Picchu. She is a PhD in optics from the University of Rochester, as I am. So I asked her if I could use her as an example of somebody who has a completely different speaking style. I'm very extroverted. I use inflection. I'm dynamic. I like to dance around and do some things like that. I'm not really super organized. My notes for this talk is pretty much just kind of some madman scribbles next to some things, and I hardly ever actually reference them. Because I'm good at being impromptu, and sometimes I can think of a story, and I will go tangentially off onto that story. And that's actually a little bit of a weakness. Kathleen could never do that. She's more introverted. She's got what I call an even voice, maybe borderline monotone. She's not nearly as dynamic as I am. So she becomes a very methodical speaker, but she's extremely organized. She has every single point organized and memorized in her head or on a card right in front of her that she can basically read out. So she's a planner and she stays on course. If she tried to pull off a talk that I did, that I can do, it wouldn't work. If I tried to actually organize my talks like she does, it wouldn't work for me either. You have to understand what your abilities are. Certainly connect with the audience when you're presenting. This is a bad venue for one other reason. I almost have to walk over here to really point, otherwise I can't turn around and look at you very well. But I'm still trying to show you that I'm confident in what I'm saying. I'm actually not very nervous, except for this public. I'm not very nervous at all. I've done these sorts of talks enough that I'm no longer that nervous when I'm giving them. But if you are nervous, you need to try to make sure that people can't really tell that you're nervous. That's where practice can really help. Have good posture. Try not to pace too much. Try to use some eye contact. We got doors slamming here. We had stuff going on up here. That requires a speaker to have focus, especially if it's in a conference where people are going in and out of the room, and there's people talking in the back, and all sorts of things can be going on. And just try to relax. Practice is what really helps. The idea here from this bridge in Venice, Rialto, I can't remember its name exactly, Ponte Rialto, is you're trying to build a bridge to the audience. I like that. It's kind of cool. The way you sound is very important in the presentation. Appropriating and consistent volume matters. And these are really bad in a way, because I'm talking to you now, and if I talk, my voice is not the same volume at all. And I've seen speakers, especially if, I'm going to go off film here, if I'm over here, and you see some of these, you're at a weird angle, and people start talking like this, and then they're doing this the whole time. And this isn't even as bad as it can be. I've heard it, I've seen cases and heard cases where people are 1/3 the volume when they're pointed away from when they're facing the microphone. Silly little things, but you know what? It's distracting, that's the point. Try to use silence instead of filler noise. So, I was not really what you want to be doing. I'm going to make a comment about language now. Many people, the language of science and engineering at the moment, at least in the West, is English. In the late 1800s, it was German. It's possible in 50 years, it'll be Mandarin. I don't know. Regardless of what your native language is, you have to try to convey your points very well in the language that you're giving the speech. What this means is that if you're not a native speaker, you probably have to practice a little bit more, because that's something that is something you have to basically overcome. And that's just kind of the way it is. Now, with that said, as long as people can understand what you are saying, understand the words, if someone who speaks Russian gets up and gives a talk, if I understand what they're saying, I don't care if their grammar isn't completely correct. As long as I understand what they're saying, that's great. People are very, very forgiving in language, so don't be too concerned about it. Just make sure you do enough practice that it doesn't become a problem or become a barrier to people understanding what you're doing. Emphasis on emphasis tools. So, like this laser pointer. I'm not a big laser pointer guy. I'm always afraid I'm going to blind somebody or do something like that. I actually prefer a mechanical pointer. Now, if I was up here trying to point with a mechanical pointer, it would be a huge distraction. As a matter of fact, I would argue that for me, using this very much is a big distraction too. I'm trying to sort of point over my shoulder here to just make the point so I can kind of keep facing you. But you can see most of the speakers we've had are really trying to kind of handle this fact that this room was built for someone to write on a chalkboard and lecture and not to give a presentation in this sort of medium. And people are doing pretty well at it, or doing a pretty good job. Pointers, you'll see people that'll have a lazy pointer, you know, and it's kind of going, and you don't know where the heck that thing is going. You know, you're following it. You'll see people that are pointing the same thing, and I'll just keep pointing and pointing and pointing. In this room, it's very unusual, because usually I don't like the green ones, because the green ones normally just, you know, blow you away. They're so bright, but eye response is so much better than that wavelength. You know, having this microphone I keep hitting, that's a distraction. Sorry about that. Props, you know, you can use props. What Professor Jacobs just had was all kinds of great props. I one time gave a talk where I had a glass and a basketball, and I tried to show some geometry that if you're trying to polish an optic, which would be the top of this, and this is your tool that you're using, you know, you can end up with these kinds of errors. And the problem is I just couldn't spin the basketball on my finger to show it. That was a joke. Not a good one. Delivering within the time limit and hitting the deadlines really is required. I would say that in this medium, it's a little bit more forgiving because it's an academic conference. I'll tell you right now, I'm in industry, and I don't like it when I'm in an industrial type of conference, and people are going 10 minutes over, because that's my time. And I guarantee you I have a customer or a business colleague or somebody else, I've got to go try to deal with them at that moment. So the key is try to stick to the time. Try not to go over. And if you're on time, or even if you're a little early, nobody's going to be upset. If you go too long, yeah, you may start upsetting some people. And by the way, anybody speak Czech? I guess this is a Czech calendar in Braille. I typed in calendar in Wikipedia. This is the best one I found. So. And testing your length when you practice is really a good thing to do. Let's see. Answering questions properly really impresses people. There's a few tips to survive, especially if people are asking in English and English is not your native language. Repeat all the questions. So if somebody asks me a question, I repeat it back to them. That shows that I understood what their question was. But it also buys you time to start thinking about an answer. You don't necessarily have to do that. That's just a nice trick to use. Take time to think and answer. Just because somebody answered the question doesn't mean you immediately have to give an answer. Again, I'm going to go back to Professor McLeod this morning. A couple of times people answered a question and he put a sentence or two in there that to me looked like maybe he was buying a little bit of time while we also tried to think his answer. And it was also a truthful sort of thing he was saying. I think the one in particular was when he put a caveat down that he's going to, what was it? He said something about he was not going to actually answer the question, he's going to say it depends. So while he was saying that, which was exactly the point he wanted to make, I guarantee you he was also thinking about what he was going to say next. He bought himself a little bit of time. But he also could have stopped, and he could have sat there for a moment, and nobody would have jumped up and down and had a problem. Now if he sits there and says, that doesn't look as good. These are just little tiny things to make you look a little bit better. Yes?
Well, one point about the question. There's actually two reasons that's a good thing to do. One of them is in many conferences, the person asking the question, many people can't hear what that question is. And a good moderator will either repeat the question or ask the speaker to repeat the question. The second good thing about repeating the question is if the person asking the question did not ask the question and you repeat it back to them, you get a chance for that person to say what he really wants you to discuss. And then you're not going off and answering some questions.
Yes. Yes, those are additional points that I make when I have a little bit more time, and they're very good points to make. If you don't do that, there is a risk of a miscommunication, and that happens. You know, you see that sort of thing happen. Learn to say you don't know, but there's the right way to say you don't know and the wrong way to say you don't know. The wrong way to say you don't know is, I don't know. The right way to say it is, we haven't considered that yet. Good idea, we're going to consider that. You try to make a positive sort of comment. Because a portion of the reason why you're giving the scientific presentation is because you want people to feel free to critique your work, and you want to be able to think about what they've asked. So it's actually not a bad thing if somebody finds a problem in your work and your presentation. There's always the next conference or the next time you see people that you can correct the issue. Very few of us have gone through our career where we felt like somebody hasn't gotten us in a conference on something that we really feel we should have thought of. It's going to happen. Remain tactful if somebody starts becoming rude. Usually a moderator in a session will help with this a little bit, but certainly don't reciprocate. Don't reciprocate rudeness. Take the high road. You'll look really good if you do that. Understand cultural differences, and I don't think I need to explain too much of that. We come from different parts of the world. Normally, it's a pretty large community, and understand that not everybody believes the same sort of behavior is rude or is polite. So if you work to at least understand that, if somebody asks you a question from a different part of the world and you might consider it rude, just think that's probably not rude for them. That's probably just kind of a cultural thing, no problem. And then learn from the experience of answering questions. In the longer version of this presentation, I actually also talk about follow-through a little bit. I'll just make a comment here about a couple comments about it. Following through means you make yourself available to people after the session. You make sure to answer their questions. If you write someone's name down and get their business card, you agree you're going to answer a question or something like that, make sure you follow through. Make sure you do what you say you're going to do. If you do that, the next time you see those people, or over the course of your career when you see these people, your reputation will actually get better and better. You'll become friendlier with people. Collaboration will be easier. It's very, very good to follow through. Michael Alley is a professor, or at least a lecturer at Penn State, and he has a really nice book on the craft of scientific presentations. And I've read the book. It's actually very interesting because he talks about a lot of famous scientists and physicists in particular that have been lecturers, given lectures. He even gives some examples of cases where researchers were not good speakers and how it actually ended up hurting them personally. There was one case, I can't remember exactly what it was, but the head of the department gave a presentation because the researcher actually wasn't a particularly good speaker. And guess who the media jumped on and thought got credit for the good work? It was the head of the department who had really nothing to do with the work, but they were forced to have him give the information and give the press conference speech because the actual inventor wasn't a good speaker. So this is a nice little reference for a lot of these things. Michael also teaches an SPIE workshop, so one of the professional societies, and I know he goes around to other places too. So this is just a nice reference. By the way, I'm a traditional optical engineer by trade. This is actually a small subset of a workshop that I teach for SPIE. It'll be actually next week, will be the first time I teach it. And what I normally do in my work is I'm the guy who delivers light to things with lenses and things like that. So. And my last couple of slides in the workshop, we don't need to read these. They're just my references and where I got my images. So I hope that this has been at least a little bit instructive on some of the things you can do to try to become a better speaker. And about a year ago, I started looking into this because I was asked by SPIE to do that. At the time, I thought I was a really good speaker, and the more I started looking into it, the more I realized that I can always improve. That I'm not a perfect speaker, and that really nobody is. So you can always improve, and hopefully this can help a little bit. So thank you very much.
Does anybody